Welcome to The Hypnotist, the show that gives you inside access to cutting-edge hypnosis with real clients facing genuine issues. Brought to you by the hypnotherapist demanded by celebrities, CEOs, and even royalty, Adam Cox. These recordings took place live from Adam's clinic in London's world-famous Harley Street. This podcast features powerful hypnosis, so do not listen while driving or operating machinery. This recording is not suitable for those with epilepsy or severe mental health issues. So, get yourself comfortable and enjoy today's episode of The Hypnotist.
Hi, it's Adam here, and in this episode of The Hypnotist, rather than doing a hypnosis session, I thought I would answer a series of questions that I've had from the organisers of the New Zealand Hypnosis Conference that I'm going to be doing two keynote talks in a few weeks' time. Around about 2 weeks' time, I'm going to be doing those talks. And they sent me a series of questions to help introduce me to the conference delegates. So I thought I would use it as an opportunity to not just give them the responses that they've been looking for the questions they've asked, but also share those same responses with you who listen to the show. So I'm going to read out the question they've asked me and then give you my response. And hopefully you get a bit more of an insight in terms of who I am, my background, particularly as a hypnotherapist, because I appreciate that most of what you hear from me is just my hypnotherapy sessions, and you don't necessarily know that much about me. So hopefully you find this useful. So first set of questions is about professional background. And the first question is, how did you first become interested in hypnotherapy? For me, I was quite a shy child. I was quite a introverted character. And there was a library very, very close to my home. I lived in a town called Warrington, which is on the suburbs of Peterborough in Cambridgeshire. So not a very built-up area. It was quite middle-class town. And maybe a 10-minute cycle ride from my house was a library, and I have always had a fascination for learning. And I became interested in the personal development, the self-help. It was years later that I realized that came from a feeling of unworthiness. And when you don't feel very worthy, it kind of makes sense that you want to improve yourself to become worthy. So I became interested in psychology books. I remember being about 11 years old and reading books on speed reading and mnemonics and mind mapping. Some of the books from Tony Buzan I found fascinating, and so things like mind mapping and memory techniques. He also did a book on speed reading, and I found that learning about how to learn quicker really, really useful. But it was around that time that I discovered a book, and that was called Professional Stage Hypnotism by one of the legends of the hypnosis world, Ormond McGill. And there were things in there like suggestibility tests and the importance of tonality and how you can use the imagination of an individual to change how they feel. So things like temperature and focus of awareness. So I was very young. We're talking, 12, 13 years old that I had this first interest in hypnotherapy. It was later on in the UK, there was quite a famous TV show that was on at prime time on Wednesday nights called The Magical World of Hypnosis with Paul McKenna. And again, it was stage hypnosis that introduced me to the idea of hypnotism, but a combination of those early books and some early stage hypnosis shows and seeing it on TV really kind of captured my imagination. Next question, how long have you been practicing hypnotherapy? I think for people that have been listening to the show for a while, I think on several occasions I revealed that when I was 19 years old, I became a recluse. I had such severe social anxiety that I couldn't even leave my tiny apartment in Luton, where I was living at the time. The irony was that I was doing a psychology degree, and yet I was crippled by social anxiety. And I kind of knew that I didn't want to use medication. I knew for a fact that if I went to a local GP and described my symptoms, they would have diagnosed me with clinical depression and probably generalized anxiety disorder, and put me on antidepressants or beta blockers or SSRIs, and I wasn't interested in being medicated for the symptoms. I just had this innate feeling that somehow I was creating it myself. So being highly socially anxious, it was quite fortunate that the university that I was studying psychology at had a 24-hour library. So I would kind of hide away in the daytime, and then at night when there was no one around, I would seek out the library and I would really try and find everything out I could about therapeutic change, learning a lot about anxiety and emotional states. So my very first experience of hypnotherapy, and the reason I liked hypnotherapy, is it's at the end of the therapeutic spectrum where change happens quickly. So there's things on the other end of the spectrum, like counseling and psychoanalysis. Change can take years, if at all, but then you've got this rapid change. And in that bracket, you've got things like clinical hypnotherapy, you've got NLP and various more rapid techniques. And that was the thing I was interested in because I was 19 years old. I didn't want to keep living with this crippling anxiety for years and years. So in many ways, I was my very first client. But it was actually around about 11 years ago when I had already built up a successful PR agency that I went back to hypnotherapy because I discovered a concept called ikigai, which is the Japanese concept for the reason of being, and realized that actually I needed to do the thing that I was most fascinated, most passionate about, most interested in. And that was hypnosis, psychology, and change, which is why around 11, 12 years ago, I did postgraduate qualifications in hypnotherapy. And then my background in business helped me to launch quite a successful hypnotherapy practice. So I've been working with clients for around about 10, 11 years now. What are the main certifications or qualifications that you hold in hypnotherapy or related fields? So I do have a degree in psychology, and I'm one of the very few hypnotherapists in the UK that actually have university accredited postgraduate qualifications in hypnosis. So I'm not interested in academia. I was interested in having the most robust knowledge I could on hypnotherapy. So I did 3 years of studying clinical hypnotherapy at postgraduate level. So I have 2/3 of a master's degree, and that master's degree, all I needed to do to get the master's degree was a research project, but I knew that would take a year of my time, and I was more interested in building a practice and actually seeing clients. So I have a postgraduate diploma and a postgraduate certificate, both at distinction level, and obviously done lots and lots of training since then, which is more practical in nature. Next question. What is your current role in the field of hypnotherapy? So as most of you know from the show, I'm a practicing hypnotherapist, but I'm more well known for having the Hypnotist podcast, which has had over 10 million downloads and is one of the world's most popular hypnosis podcasts. In fact, there was almost a directory that chart different podcasts, and literally yesterday, I think, or the day before, the Hypnotist podcast is number one of the top 100 hypnosis podcasts in the world. Now, I don't know how credible that organization is, but either way, it's a directory specifically of hypnosis podcasts, and it's the number one. So that's really what I'm known for these days, being a practicing hypnotherapist, but also a podcast host of the very podcast that you're listening to now. So this next section is about expertise and specializations. What specific areas of hypnotherapy do you specialize in? So when I started around about 10 years ago, I chose to, and pretty much for my first year or so, almost exclusively, I focused on weight loss hypnosis because I felt that the medical industry was doing a disservice. If you think about how the medical industry look at obesity, they prescribe medication. You've got drugs now that weren't around at the time, like Ozempic, which is a diabetes drug. You've got the slimming drugs, which are effectively, you're talking about things that just mess around with the metabolism, and you've got things that are like Xenical that impede the digestion of fat. But then you've got bariatric surgery, which kind of mutilates internal organs. And I thought all of this is a barbaric way of dealing with the issue of weight loss. And I remember writing a blog post at the time about how bariatric surgery would be like sewing the mouth of a child shut if they were crying. Like, it might stop the child crying, but it doesn't address why the child was crying to begin with. So that was my thoughts on it, is that you've got to deal with the cause, not the outcome. And I worked a lot with weight loss, and actually a lot of it is coping strategies and emotional triggers, and absolutely nothing to do with the knowledge of nutrition or willpower, which was my initial thought. And I've also worked a lot with people with phobias. And that's because I had very severe phobias myself. You could consider social anxiety a phobia of people. It's very tricky to live in the world if you're scared of people. I had a fear of heights, I had a fear of public speaking, and one by one I've addressed all of my own phobias. So those were the areas that I felt most comfortable working on in the beginning. But as a result of the podcast, now my client and specialism has become quite broad, because I'm known for a hypnotherapist working in lots of different areas. So the kind of clients or issues I primarily work with now, a lot of anxiety, sleep issues, addictions, more recently, kind of rarer things like nail biting or grinding teeth or burning mouth syndrome, and quite a lot around the aftermath of toxic relationships as well, like narcissistic relationships. So it's become much more varied. Are there any innovative techniques or methodologies in hypnotherapy that you have pioneered or contributed to? So at conferences, I have a talk called Nested Loops Made Easy. And nested loops is quite a complex way of telling stories within stories within stories. And I have a way of doing it which is much easier to do, so you don't get lost in your own loops. So that multiple levels of disassociation, again, you probably are familiar with being on the receiving end of that if you listen to the show. But also I have something I feel is quite original, which is taking a metaphor from the movie Tenet, and they have this idea of a temporal pincer movement. So quite often when I'm working with people with severe trauma, particularly the receiving end of abuse or violence, that temporal pincer movement technique is very, very useful, because effectively you have multiple versions of the person going backwards and forwards to that moment in time, almost to create an ambush, but it acts as a reframe, as a pattern interrupt, and creates empowering emotional associations to that moment. So I feel that's quite an original technique. What is my speaking experience? Have I spoken at other conferences? Yes. So I've spoken at HypnoThoughts Live in Vegas for the last 3 years. My first talk was on movie metaphors, because I love taking inspiration from movies and crafting, almost storytelling hypnosis sessions from those movies. They act as a great structure. It's also where I got inspiration for my way of doing nested loops from a movie called The Inception. So I call it the Inception Induction. So that was the year one, was movie metaphors. Year two, I did a talk about AI in the future of hypnotherapy. And I'm absolutely convinced that if you are a script-based or technique-based hypnotherapist, AI is going to replace you very, very quickly. Hypnotherapists need to be very human, very diagnostic, and calibrate to the client that they're working with. So I did a talk on that. I also did my first talk on nested loops. And then this last summer, I was back in Vegas, and I did a revised version of my Nested Loops Made Easy, the Inception Induction, and I also did a updated version of the movie Metaphors. So I've spoken at, and if you don't know, by the way, HypnoThoughts Live in Vegas is the world's biggest hypnosis conference. So I've spoken there at 3 times. I was at the Irish Hypnosis Conference in Dublin in April. Next month, I'm going to be at the New Zealand conference, and I'm going to be at the UK Hypnosis Conference. And it was always quite funny for me that I was going around the world speaking at other conferences, and the UK Hypnosis Conference is a 20-minute drive from my house. But this year I am being invited to speak there, talking about the power of podcasts for hypnotherapists. So I do get to speak at some of these conferences most years, in fact, every year for the last 3 years. What are some of the messages that I'm going to be talking about to the New Zealand conference? Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the fourth dimension. Some of you may have heard a recent episode that I published a couple of weeks ago that took that from a different conference, which is the Hypnosis Education Association. And I did a 1-hour talk on hypnosis in the fourth dimension. So I'm going to be doing that at the New Zealand conference. And I'm also going to be talking about marketing, because a lot of hypnotherapists are very good hypnotherapists, but they don't have any clients. And I'm in a fortunate position that because of my background in business and marketing and branding, I always have a big client list and regular clients and new clients all the time. So I'm going to be sharing my knowledge with other hypnotherapists as to how they could do some of those things. What makes your topic particularly important or timely for the hypnotherapy community? There is a narrative going around that everything that there is to learn in hypnosis has already been taught. And I think my take on the imagination being akin to the fourth dimension it's a game changer. It gives an entirely new way of perceiving hypnosis and the internal constructs of the mind, which creates infinite possibilities as to how to harness that. And as I've said before, my talk on marketing is because there's too many talented hypnotherapists that give up because it's not financially viable for them. And I think that's a tragedy because there is no shortage of people in need out there in the world. All right, this section is called Personal Insights and Motivation. So what inspires or motivates you in your work as a hypnotherapist? Genuinely, there is nothing more fulfilling than having a positive impact on the trajectory of someone's life. And you know that to be true from your own experience. Like, there will be people that had an impact in your life, and that might be a teacher or a family member, that maybe it was even just a short conversation or they just believed in you, absolutely. And your life took a different trajectory from that point in time. And there's nothing more fulfilling than that. So that's my main inspiration and motivation. The podcast means that I have a reasonably big audience out there in the world as a hypnotherapist. So whenever I get messages or comments or reviews, I use the analogy, more fuel in the tank for the mission. And I believe that to be true because, if you have the goal to impact people's lives, hearing that you've done that in some way keeps you motivated and enthusiastic. And there's a lot of things where enthusiasm runs out. Hopefully it comes across in my voice. I've been doing this daily pretty much for the last 11 years. And I probably have more enthusiasm now than I did when I started. And if you can find that in your life of something, you've got that level of enthusiasm and it just never runs dry, you're very, very lucky, because there are a lot of people that their primary source of income is doing something that they hate for people they don't respect. And that's not a good existence if you're spending a lot of your time doing that. So for me, the fulfillment comes from feeling like I'm actually having a positive impact on people's lives, and I get to be creative as well, which again is one of my key values. Next question is, have you had any personal experiences with hypnotherapy that have shaped your approach to the practice? As I said before, essentially I was my first client. So at the age of 19, I got to a point of being suicidal because I had such severe social anxiety. I couldn't imagine a world where I could live in and couldn't interact with people. So that, in a weird way, meant that I had nothing to lose, and I was willing to do whatever it took to create that change. So that was my first experience of doing hypnotherapy myself. And it was quite a radical change. Within a year, I had no more social anxiety, and it gave me a different perspective. So all these things that I was learning about psychology meant that I became quite successful in sales for radio and media. And then at the age of 23, I set up my own company because figuring out how to change emotional states in myself kind of felt like a superpower. So that's been very useful for me. And believe it or not, I listen to my own hypnotherapy sessions because I feel that if you do self-hypnosis within a dialogue, you can never get as deep as when you're listening to a recording. So some of the sessions that you hear on the podcast, I'm actually just doing for me. And if you benefit as well, then that's great. But it's for me to listen to my own podcast to get the benefit from that. What advice would you give to someone just starting out in the field of hypnotherapy? There's a mantra that I love, and I try and live by this, and that is learn before you earn. A lot of people go into a situation or an environment and they don't have the competency yet, they don't have the skill set or the distinctions, and it's all about taking the money from the clients. And my belief is get good first, get very competent first. So learn before you earn, but when you have learned, make sure that you earn. And I think that's quite a helpful bit of advice for any hypnotherapy. One of the tips I would say, if you are a hypnotherapist listening to this, is be willing to do free sessions in a specific niche in exchange for feedback, which could be used as testimonials, because then it's a fair exchange of value. You get to practice on people, and also you get that social proof to help you get additional clients in the future as well. So that's quite a good tip. But learn before you earn is my advice. Have I published any books, papers, or articles on hypnotherapy? I've done a few blog posts, but really I'm not an academic. So for me, my podcast and YouTube channel is my contribution to hypnosis, and any of my discussions at conferences, that's where I feel like I'm contributing to, let's say, the industry or the community of hypnosis. Next question. Have you trained or mentored other hypnotherapists? And if so, what do I enjoy about that process? So I actually have a mentorship package. Some people mentor on the hypnotherapeutic techniques. There's lots of people that do that. I don't do that, or I rarely do that. My mentorship is really focused on the business side of things, the marketing, the branding, the strategy side of things, because I feel that that's where I can add most value to an aspiring hypnotherapist. There are too many talented hypnotherapists that aren't making sufficient money to make it viable, and then they quit. So my mentorship that I offer is to help people turn their skill set and their passion and their enthusiasm into a viable business. So if you're interested in that, I will put a link in the show notes, and you can kind of reach out to me. And there is a taster session, which is heavily discounted. So you can even do a mentorship session with me. And if you get value from that, then you can consider doing a longer term relationship. Next question. Are you involved in any research or ongoing projects related to hypnotherapy? I kind of feel that my podcast is a project because I'm one of the few people confidentially sharing real hypnosis sessions with the world. A lot of people, they don't know what a hypnotherapy session is like. So the fact that I publish real hypnosis, not just recordings of, scripted things, I feel is a contribution. But I'm no academic. Working with clients is my research, and sharing how I do hypnosis with the world, I feel is definitely a contribution to the field. Next question. What do you see as the future of hypnotherapy in terms of growth and acceptance? I think it's great when you see podcasts like Huberman Lab interviewing high-profile academic hypnotists. I think that's great. I think Hollywood sometimes takes the sinister look. A lot of hypnotherapists tend to be the antagonists. If you've seen a movie called Get Out, it's the bad woman that is the hypnotist in that. So I feel like sometimes what you see in the wider area isn't always good. There's a lot of misconceptions still about hypnosis, and that's why my podcast is hopefully giving people a more realistic idea of what hypnosis is. I do think that artificial intelligence and what's being called AI agents, there will be specialist therapeutic AI agents that won't be able to do what a human therapist can do. But if you're a human therapist that just reads a script at a client, or you've got your one or two techniques that you've learned on a weekend training session, and you're just doing that for every client, AI agents are going to replace you very, very quickly. So I feel that there is a real need to be very, very human and very, very to calibrate to the client that you're working with. Otherwise, I think it could be it could be a good thing, because I think there's going to be a lot of disruption. And I do think that there is no shortage of people that would benefit from good hypnotherapists. Unfortunately, in most countries, hypnotherapy is not regulated, so there's lots of people that aren't very competent that call themselves hypnotherapists. You never find a dentist that has done a weekend course in dentistry and then allowed to kind of work on people's mouths, or a doctor or a surgeon that's done a few weeks and read a few books. That can happen in hypnotherapy. So if you are considering using a hypnotherapist, do take the time to check the credentials, the qualifications, the background of the hypnotherapist that you're working with. And again, that's helped me to have a podcast, because I'm coming up to 1,500 episodes of real hypnosis sessions that anyone could listen to. So most people would come to the conclusion that I'm not a beginner in this. I've been doing it, because you could go back 3 years and hear the stuff that I've done. So I feel like for good hypnotherapists, the future is very bright. For people that are badly trained or unethical, they're not going to make it in the future. Do I have any future hypnotherapy related plans or ambitions or goals? Yeah, I mean, originally, before I launched the podcast, and in many ways, it's the reason that I launched the podcast, because I had this goal to impact 1 million people through my hypnosis. And that's very difficult to do if you're only seeing clients one-to-one. So I'm a bit of an audio geek, and I have all these kind of good quality microphones, and I was recording all of my sessions when I was working in Harley Street in central London. So I feel that that was my original goal, but with 10 million downloads, I've way exceeded that 1 million people hear my hypnosis goal. So I do have a very big goal, which is to impact 100 million people with my hypnosis, and that would require different approaches, the kind of things that I'm working on now. But I have this broader mission, and when I pieced it all together, all the things that I was most passionate about linked to my voice. And that's why I continue to do 1 or 2 episodes daily on my podcast, because I feel that my purpose in the world is to make a positive change, and using my voice to do that. And hopefully, if you listen to the show, you agree with that. And if you don't, you probably aren't listening. Let's be fair. So that's my kind of plans and goals. I've been teasing a new membership, a low cost, because not everyone can afford to work with me. There is going to be a low cost membership that I'm going to be launching very, very soon, probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks, that will be very low cost. We're talking about $10, $12, something like that. And that's going to have access to every single audio download that I've done, written transcripts of all I've done. It's going to have discounts on private one-to-one hypnotherapy sessions, and probably a group hypnosis session once per month as well. So that's coming soon, which I'm really excited about. And finally, this is the final question. Can you share something about yourself that the audience may find surprising? So you may find this surprising, you may not. So I can speak conversational Portuguese. A few years ago, when I became single again, I met a woman that I really liked, based in Brazil. I actually flew to Brazil for our first date, And for the last 3 years, pretty much, I've been on Duolingo every day and having lots of conversations in Portuguese. So I can speak conversational Portuguese. So I'll give you a little bit. Eu falo português. Meu nome é Adal. Eu muito gosto de hipnose e eu muito gosto de psicologia e obrigado para escutar meu podcast. So basically I said, I speak some Portuguese and I really like hypnosis and psychology, and thank you very much for listening to my show. So maybe that surprised you, maybe that didn't, but I feel very proud because, again, language learning was never my thing, but I do have a belief system, and that is that I can learn anything that I'm committed to, and sometimes you just need the right motive, the right reason to learn something. So if you found this useful, let me know. You can drop me an email, adam@adamcox.co.uk. If you've got any other questions you'd like to ask me, if you find this kind of stuff useful rather than just hearing my hypnosis sessions, let me know and I can do some more questions and answers and that kind of stuff. And if you don't like this, also let me know. You can find me on Instagram. It's @AdamCoxOfficial. If you hate this stuff, send me a message, let me know, because I want to make this podcast useful for you, the listeners. And if you find it useful, I'll do more of this kind of stuff. And if you don't, I'll just stick to my hypnosis sessions. Hope you found this useful. Thanks for listening all the way through. And the next episode definitely will be a hypnosis session. So you take care.
Thank you for listening to The Hypnotist with Adam Cox, the show that gives you inside access to cutting-edge hypnosis with real clients facing genuine issues. To automatically receive the latest episodes, please subscribe. If you'd like to support the show, please share this episode with just one friend you think it could help. And if this episode helped you, please leave us a 5-star review.